Okay, to kick off the entire chapter of understanding the head, I need to say one very important thing. The head, at its most simple, is like a box. It's not like a sphere, it's like a box. It has planes that face the front, it has planes that face the side, and there are some back planes too that are a bit less important for now. But the front and the side planes are really, really important. In breaking down the head, we'll be looking at planes that point forwards, upwards, to the side, underneath, or things that transition in between. That is a good fundamental way of understanding the head. We're going to start with the brow region. Now, the thing I love about the brow is it's pretty simple from a geometric standpoint, not a whole lot of complex planes, but also more importantly, it represents the front of the box and the side of the box. You can see this graphic sort of shadow here as the head goes into the side, and obviously the same on the other side. The other thing I like about the brow is that these planes are very flat. There's not a whole lot of complexity here. Like you can see again with the shadow, just look how flat this plane is. There is a little bit of complexity again on this side of the Asaro head, which has more resolution. We can see here, this is the zygomatic bone that I'll point out when we draw it and break it down with photos. We'll probably end the brow region there and we'll trace the zygomatic up and around as it transitions to the front. There's a few front planes here that we'll look at. And there's also some interesting like protrusion elements here. The brow is not just straight. It has a little bit of this kind of angling action to it as it protrudes out. And then we'll probably cut off the brow right around here, right before it sinks into the eye socket. And of course, we'll cover the eye sockets in a later chapter. So again, head is like a box. The brow, as we'll see, represents a lot of the front of the box and the sides of the box. So let's get into it. All right, so let's start off by pulling up this photo of a swimmer, I guess. It's going to be good reference for the brow region, though. These colors up here, by the way, are not a sideways German flag. They are just colors that I will use to kind of color code my drawings. The first thing I'll use is the orange color to mark some important landmarks on the picture, starting with what I think is the most important landmark on the brow, and that is where it separates from the front of the head to the side of the head. And remember, the head is like a box, so the front of the box versus the side of the box. This conveniently will coincide with where the eyebrow itself turns. Eyebrows kind of have this angle to them where they go up like this and down like this. Even this model, who has pretty straight eyebrows, there will be this shift in angle, right? Right there. Same with this eyebrow, you'll see that shift happening right there. So the first landmark I'm going to put down is this little circle that will mark that location on the model. Now I'll grab my pencil color and I can throw in this plane. Now, it's a bit of an angled plane. It's not straight, like it's not a straight up and down plane like this. It's got a bit of an angle to it. And for our purposes here in the brow section, let's end the brow right where the hairline is. So the hair, kind of goes like this. All right, now let's tackle this, where the eyes are. We're not going to be drawing eyes in this section. We're going to be focused on the planes. The thing I like to do to simplify this whole region is basically just draw a kind of a straight line that connects our two landmarks. This line will separate the protruding brow from the eye sockets. Now the eye sockets start digging into the skull. Just to look at the skull very quickly to sort of retrace our steps, we've marked this plane, we've marked its neighboring landmark over there. This skull diagram beautifully shows this angle that we talked about. Now, you might be wondering why this part is orange, like you see this color is orange on this diagram. The orange part of this skull diagram represents the bone that is directly underneath your skin. I mean, if you just tapped on your own forehead, the bone is right there, right? You can even look at the cheeks there. We'll talk about the cheeks later, but if you tapped your own face right there, you can feel the bone just under the surface. The term is subcutaneous. That's the annoying anatomy term, but it just means superficial bone. Anyway, back to our brow diagram. We've marked the hairline, which is roughly there. And then I've drawn kind of this straight line here. Now, we want to talk about the eye sockets, which dig into the face. Now, what I like to do to simplify this down, typically you can use the eyebrow as a guide. Just follow that eyebrow down here, give it a little bit of thickness right there, and we'll do the same over here, a bit of thickness. And then, just like I did with this line here, let's just draw that straight, just keep it straight. And I'll just shade this dark to represent the fact that it's cutting in. I should probably take down the opacity of this layer so we can see our drawing a little more clearly at this point. Now I want to be clear about something. This line, this bottom line we just drew, is more or less cutting halfway through the eye socket. It's this. It's not all the way down the eyes. It's not all the way. It's just about here. And again, as we move down the face, we'll talk about, how all these things connect. But just for now, this represents the sort of upper half of the eye socket area. A few more steps from here. Let's just draw this line straight back and this corresponding one here. Of course, the nice part of the head is it's symmetrical. Just make the same decisions on both sides. The side of the head will just continue back just a little bit like this. Again, this is the brow region, so I'm not going to deal with the side of the head right now. But so for this exercise, let's just continue this back in a circular fashion, maintaining the rhythm of this. If we look at the skull clearly shows that rhythm, right? So we have three important features mapped out: the front of the brow, the sides of the brow, and then where the brow turns under. These are all very major plane changes that contribute to the boxiness of the head. Good, but we're still not done. There's just a few little nitpicky little planes in here that they're pretty minor. Like the brow is pretty flat, but it does curve around a little bit. In fact, if I hide my skull model, just so we can see our little Asaro head right here, you notice it's these two planes right there, right? Those planes exist, but they are secondary to what we've already mapped out here because the plane change itself is pretty minor. It's not as steep of a change. Whereas like the plane changes we have here, from the front of the head to the side of the head, these plane changes are massive. Like it's a huge directional shift. Again, contributing to the overall boxy structure of the head. And I'll just throw these in shadow to be clear about it. And I'll just hide this guy. You can see it's a very clear kind of box-like form. Now, this is something that didn't come into play on this front view because it's pretty obvious from a front view, but it's always helpful to mark the center line as well. In fact, when you're landmarking, you can even mark sort of where that center is. And now let's continue this exploration, but with a 3/4 view. And we'll bring in another model here. Now this guy obviously takes very good care in manicuring his physical appearance, which is great for us because it's very clear what the planes are doing. So let's go through what we did on him, but now from a 3/4 view. I'll start the same way. Let's mark these landmarks right where that brow turns, right? It's very obvious to see it. Now in a 3/4 view, this landmark sits right on the contour because like I showed you in this diagram, this is such a strong plane change. The angle from front to side, that is a steep change. So when we see the model in 3/4 view, this corresponding landmark is right on the edge. Let's also mark the center line of this guy because this is going to be important. Because of course a 3/4 view introduces foreshortening, the artist's most hated enemy. It's actually not that hard once you get to know it. But in our front view, where this was equal to that, because now it's foreshortened, this is shorter than that, even though we know that these are physically the same length, it's just adjusted by perspective, right? That's what foreshortening is. So when you're dealing with perspective, as you often will be with the head, knowing the center line and drawing the center line can really help with the foreshortening part. Let's get our pencil out again and start doing the same planes. The temple region, again, has this curved line. If I undo that, can you see it? Can you see how there's a rhythmical element to it? In fact, let's bring back in our friend, the skull. There's this beautiful rhythm. It goes up this orbital bone and around. And in fact, because we can see the diagram is orange here, that means this bone is right on the surface. You can feel this on your own skull. You can feel this, there's a ridge here. You can feel that ridge right on your own skull. And if you just traced your fingers this way, you can feel how that ridge exists right underneath the surface of your skin. Kind of creepy almost. And once you know that, you can see it on the model. My brain can see a line there, even though it's softened in real life. Of course, right now we're drawing the planes as if the change is razor sharp. That's for our own understanding. In reality, these planes are softened a bit, but of course it's beneficial to understand them first as hard changes. So I'm going to draw this plane here. And just like before, the corresponding plane is the contour when it's a 3/4 view. So I'm just going to trace the contour of this guy's head. We'll mark off the top of the hairline and just connect them like this. I will turn down the transparency of this layer so we can see our drawing a bit better. Now, just like I did before, let's connect these lines here with more or less a straight line. In fact, I'm actually bending it upward just a little bit. Again, depending on the model, this line will either bend up or be straight, or it has different adjustments, but we can bend it a little bit up, that's okay. Let's now deal with the eye sockets. Of course, from a 3/4 view, you can physically see that the eye sockets dig into the head. We'll do that same contour over here and just connect it with a line that's basically parallel to the one above it. Now, one thing I don't think I've explicitly said is I am not dealing with the nose here. I'm basically eliminating the nose from this equation, which makes sense. This is a section on the brow, not the nose. We'll deal with the entire head construction, of course, as we go through this class. Right now, we're isolating the brow. I forgot to indicate just a little bit of thickness there. And this line goes straight back to the ear. If we look at the skull, it essentially follows this line. Right back, it reaches the tip of the ear. This bone, by the way, is called the zygomatic bone, more commonly known as the cheekbone. And we'll talk about that more in the next section. For now, let's isolate our drawings here. And for the sake of completion, let's draw this center line going down, cutting into the skull. Okay, also, you notice I've indicated just a little bit of thickness here. I'm taking a slight step up in complexity from our first one. There is a bit of thickness there. This is caused by the orbital bone coming up here, and because that bone is superficial, its thickness needs to be observed. So I'm adding complexity as we go, drawing by drawing. All right, a few more bits of complexity to add before our understanding of the brow is complete. Let's address this further breakdown of planes that's indicated by these two lines here. Because right now, if you look at our brow diagrams right now, it almost looks like this is perfectly flat. But of course it isn't. The brow goes around, and we haven't shown anything that deals with that complexity. So let's add this. The reason I haven't added them yet is because I wanted to deal with the major directional changes first. This is like the front part of the head. This is the side part of the head. There's a major change in direction. That's the key thing to understand first. Now, after that understanding, we can address the subtle curvature that's happening here. Looking at the skull model, we've already got this plane right in here. And in fact, let's bring back our model here to look at some good reference. Now, these planes will be different on everybody, but on him, I'm kind of seeing it right in here. We already know about this one, and then this plane is here, and of course, its corresponding plane is somewhere in there. These planes serve to explain the subtle roundness of the brow. So we have this plane here, 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 and then this major change of direction there. So let's add them to our existing diagram. And you might be wondering why I've left a little gap between those new planes and the eye sockets down here. The reason for that is, let's look at the skull model, there's a little bit of a protuberance happening right in here. The way the orbit works, it kind of juts out. The brow is pretty smooth as it comes down, but it kind of juts out right before the eyebrow starts. There's this protuberance here happening, this kind of cresting action. This is represented on our Asaro head as well, this bit of thickness here. And it also has this beautiful flow. Unlike the straight line we drew here, the protuberance has more of a curved line that goes around the model like this. If I go back to our photograph of the model here, you'll notice that you can see the protuberance happening here, and then by the time it gets to the corner of his eyebrow, which was our landmark originally, right? By the time it gets there, it thins out. So it's this elegant arcing rhythm that happens. The protuberance, kind of swelling out around the middle of the face and then sinking back in where the major plane change happens here. So I will go back to our drawing and I will simply add this information. And now at this point, all the planes of the brow have been dealt with. And I just want to remind you that while humans have the same construction from person to person, the arrangement can change. For example, here's a frame from the movie Aliens, which I was just watching last week. Starting with him, look at how noticeable this is. It's just this massive kind of thing. You can use this perhaps as a design element to contribute to like a masculine look. Of course, females have it too. It's just perhaps a little bit softer. But again, it varies from person to person. I don't want to make broad generalizations. But in general, one thing that can separate a masculine design from a feminine design is an accentuation of the plane changes. And these particular planes here are great fodder for design decisions. Even this guy here is interesting. I know he's blurred out, but we can clearly see the contour comes down and then juts out before sinking into the eye socket area. This jutting out here is caused by this rhythm here. And that's the other thing. Sometimes the rhythm goes with the eyes, like on Ripley here, the character in the movie, played by Sigourney Weaver here. We can have this sort of rhythm, where on this gentleman back here, it's this big arcing motion. So again, watch out for the gestural variety in these planes from person to person. And just to drive it home, here's a profile view of the skull, and you can see exactly the contour that happens. In fact, let me just move this up here. This red line I'm drawing right now on the skull corresponds to this red line on this guy, and I have to edit this actually to update our diagram. It comes out. Now, in our front view, it's a little harder to see that information. We know that these planes would exist, but in a front view, they're much less visible. When we get into painting the head with values and lighting, we can maybe see this a little more. Then, of course, these planes here would probably be something like this. So now that we have that information, why not give it a go with some sketches? I'll mark out some landmarks. We know what those are, right? Let's get a midline. This is going to be a little bit in perspective. This comes down. Of course, I'm anticipating my planes, right? This juts out like this. Let's mark the hair. Let's kind of just draw to our landmarks here. In fact, let me just undo that. One thing you can do is landmark where you're going to be and then draw to that. That's something that I used to do a lot when I was first learning figure drawing. I would kind of figure out where I wanted to go with my landmarks and then literally connect the dots, because the landmarks contain just like the pure information and then the line just completes it. So they serve kind of two different purposes. All right, we know this plane here, the circular plane. We've got our friend, our protuberance here. We've got our line there. We come down for the brow, down. Sorry, not the brow, the eye sockets. And let's just fill this in with just a quick value. We'll talk about actual value use a little later in the lesson. I'm just shading this to show that it goes under. And then to complete it, we have these guys here. And you know, I feel like these two are linked. On this one, we're looking a little bit down at the face, and on this one, we're looking a little bit up at the face. Doing this addresses one of the main challenges of illustrating the head, and that is dealing with perspective. Or maybe I should say, how these rhythms exist despite the perspective. Let me just move this guy up and we'll try another one. How about one that's looking a little bit more downward than before? So let's get that. Let's get a center. I haven't marked the center for all these, but let's mark the center. Let's mark the hair. Maybe mark the sides of the brow. We'll go in with a center line, cutting into the eye sockets here. And from here, we'll just do our connections. We'll come down here, but because we're looking down, that protuberance is going to be a little bit less. Go down here. We'll get the thickness of the orbital bone there. Connect our dots up here. And again, throwing in a value just really helps sell that it turns under. And you know what? Like, I don't need to put in all of this stuff. If I wanted to, I can, but sometimes this center line just sells it enough. If I wanted to indicate maybe a different rhythm for those flowy, cresting-like pieces, I can do it this way. Change the design a little bit. Maybe these planes can have a bit more of a broad berth to them like that, as opposed to the straight ones we used here. Oh look, it's Khabib Nurmagomedov, UFC lightweight champion. And whoa, check that out. That is just awesome. Let's give that a shot. Now this is in not quite profile. There's a lot of foreshortening going on here. The center line is going to be in here. It comes down. And then the hairline is here and here. And you basically, it's just such a small bit of distance there because of the foreshortening. His brow looks flatter here, and then boy, does it ever come out there. And that rhythm is so pronounced, but it doesn't do this. It kind of, both eyes kind of have an individual one, sort of like what I did here, right? So it's more like that. And we have our side of the head here, our flat plane here, down, bit of thickness, down, and across. Maybe a little bit more of the protrusion here. Let's get this flat plane. And it's just occurring to me, I haven't been drawing the sides, but I think you guys, I mean, that's the easiest part, right? Let's just get that in. Again, follow the brow straight down, bit of thickness, and then it follows that zygomatic bone and hits the ear right where the ear begins to kind of turn up and crest upward. So I'll just get that in my drawing here. And we know the ear is probably going to be somewhere here. And if we wanted to find these planes, I'm seeing it there. If I look at the model, I can see that plane there versus this plane here. All right, let's try one that's 3/4 view, but looking up, like the head is tilted up. That's a common pose you'll probably be drawing at some point. So things are gonna be tilted back. The hair might be there, there. Let's draw that center line. The center line shows us that tilt of the head. And I'll keep it simple. I won't deal with those like protuberance things right now, because this is a complicated perspective. So let's just figure this out first before we add the complexity. Of course, that's why I showed you this iteratively, so you can do this yourself. All right, let's get the contour here that dips in. Connect the dots. Let's get that plane. I think I'm a little bit too steep with my line there. Be more up like that. Because this head is tilted up, we're gonna get a nice arcing kind of thing, looking up at it, come down, and then get this. Now I'm noticing my center line is off. Let's redraw that to accurately reflect the geometry that we're dealing with. Still throw this into shadow though. And we can trace our curvature here and continue this rhythm down as it now points to the ear, which of course is lower than our main sort of lines of action up here because the head is tilted up. And just for fun, we'll just connect this right now. And now at this point, we can add that protuberance part that goes there. And you know, if we wanted to, we could find it here. It's always useful to take my red marker and indicate these what are called cross contours, going across the form with these kind of invisible lines. A very helpful drawing practice to assure yourself that you understand the form implicitly. How about some pretty dramatic foreshortening? Again, with our knowledge of the planes and rhythms and these landmarks, it shouldn't be too difficult. Of course, don't put the hairline too high. The foreshortening will squish that in, shorten it in. This is like somewhere in there, maybe like this. Let's get that center line, which, because of foreshortening, is going to come out like that. Let's get the dip in. The protuberance thing is at such a steep angle here that it is going to give a little bit of a contour. Like you can see it on him. It's like that and then like that. That's because of that protuberance of the skull. So I'm going to get that, and then the flat part of the brow comes up from behind it. And from this angle, we can really see that this plane is not straight back this way. There's an angle to it, right? It's in more like this. Let's have a graceful sort of sweeping slight curve connecting our two dots here. And a dramatic cut there. And its partner over here. And again, on a dramatic tilt like that this angle here is very steep. And I'll draw the side plane of the head here as well. Now, one obvious point that I probably should still mention is that the hair covers and disguises a lot of the side plane of the head, but we're simply not dealing with hair in this section. I'm kind of looking right through it. I'm just noticing there, these rhythms on him are just a little bit separated. There's that little bit of dip in the middle. Just looking at one of my previous drawings, this one here, I think this would be better if I cut this in a little bit. Remember at the beginning I showed you like this plane cuts in. It's not straight, so it's a common mistake to push the brow out too far. I think it would be more like this. Finally, how about a dramatic down angle? So we'll get our landmarks in, get our hairline. Now the center line, because this is kind of straight on, the center line is not going to do us much good here because it's basically just a line down the center. Let's put it in just so we know, width-wise what our center is doing. This will help us maintain symmetry as we go. Now this is tricky because the head is pointing down. Some of these landmarks are going to be a bit wider than they would. The foreshortening is going to cause us to be looking down at the head more. This is what takes practice, just knowing these rhythms, studying them from different angles, and all the little subtleties that come with a foreshortened pose or foreshortened angle, will start to become second nature to you. Again, because we're looking down, this line is going to be bowed downwards. Also, we're not going to get much of a plane change. Well, the plane change hasn't changed, but we're not going to see much of the plane change because we're looking down. Let's put that value in. It's going to be just this narrow bit of plane change here. The protuberance part is going to be also kind of foreshortened down to more of a straight line like this. And the planes of the brow that are responsible for this bend, they're going to be kind of doing this. Again, we're looking down at them, so there's this slightly changed angle that they have. And because I've been just cutting off the brow, I'm just going to cut it off like this. Now we'll find the ear by extending this line this way. Unlike when the head was tilted up and we had this dramatic down line, the head is tilted down, we have the dramatic up line. And this will also give us the side plane of the head. And just to reinforce that boxy form, I'll shade it in. It's a bit tough to gauge the perspective when you're only drawing the brow, but the second I put in some kind of nose shape here, you can really see that that brow is tilted down. And once we add the cheek planes to this, it'll really start coming together. That's coming up next. And I mean right away, because we are finished with the brow. Let's move on.